Tommy Jaggi of Fansided here with NFL expert Marcus Mosher to talk about what is going on around the NFL right now. Marcus, we're in the thick of training camps, but we can't bury the lead here. We're going to talk about the crazy trade proposals, the trade request over the past week here. Some big names, including one that you're very familiar with. We're going to talk about James Cook, Trey Hendrickson, guys that are at camp but not participating. They want the new contracts. Matt Stafford's back injury. But we got to first, Marcus, get to the biggest news of the week. One of the biggest news pieces of the offseason so far, and that is Micah Parsons has officially requested his trade from the Dallas Cowboys. He took to social media, wrote a big old post about it, how he basically wants out. What do you make of all this?
Nothing. I mean, that's honestly my first thought was, does anybody actually expect Micah Parsons to get traded? If the answer is no, then don't put a lot of stock into this, right? This is a negotiation tactic that a lot of players have used over their careers to get what they want. I mean, let's go back a couple years. Lamar Jackson did this with the Baltimore Ravens when he was unhappy with his contract offers. He ultimately got the deal that he wanted, and nobody remembers. Myles Garrett did it this offseason. Terry McLaurin did it one day before Micah Parsons, which we'll talk about that in a second. This is just a lever that agents pull to try to get fans to react and try to put pressure on the owner, the general manager, to make a deal get done. Do I actually think Michael wants to leave? Of course not. He wants to be in Dallas. This is just his way of trying to speed up negotiations. I wouldn't put a lot of stock into this request.
Yeah, we saw this song and dance play out with Myles Garrett already this offseason. And what happened? He stayed with Cleveland. He became the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, obviously later to be surpassed by TJ Watt, but $40 million a year. Parsons is going to break the bank. He's going to make a ton of money. But humor me for a second, Marcus. If the Cowboys were willing to bend an ear and listen to offers around the league, what's the starting point here? I know we can go way back now. We can look as far back as 2018, where Khalil Mack got traded for 2 firsts, a third, a 6th-round pick. Have teams wised up since then? I don't want to use that language because Parsons is obviously a phenomenal player. Would he still go for similar value in today's market? Do teams value those picks too much?
I think he would go for more, honestly. I think he would go for quite a bit more for a couple of reasons. He's a lot younger than what Khalil Mack was when he's got traded. He has a lot less wear and tear. Remember, Micah Parsons sat out the entire 2020 season due to the COVID year. So he's got a lot of mileage still on his body. He's also very scheme independent, right? You can play him in any scheme, in basically any position. I think you are starting with either 2 first-round picks and a high-end player, or you're going right to 3 first-round picks, and that's kind of where we're at. And I think if the Cowboys actually made Micah Parsons available, there would be teams that would be willing to meet that demand, but they're not going to even take those calls. So again, we don't really need to discuss it too much, but I think he is one of the 5 or 6 players in the NFL that would go for multiple first-round picks and something else that's not a quarterback. And that's, I mean, again, this is why he's going to be paid 44, 45 million a year, is because he's that level of player.
So, Marcus, when do you think all of this plays out? I mean, we saw similar situations in Dallas with Dak Prescott's deal, CeeDee Lamb's deal last offseason. And so
Zach Martin a couple years ago. Yeah,
that's right. When do you think this ultimately gets done? Because I think both you and I agree it's going to get done at some point. Is that going to happen before week 1?
Yeah, it makes too much sense for both sides to get it done, because Micah doesn't want to give up game checks, right? In a year where he's making $22 million guaranteed on the 5th-year option. He's not going to give up more than $1 million each game to sit out. So I do think it gets done. I think it probably gets done a week or 2 from the Cowboys' first game of the season against Philadelphia on September 4th. We've seen a couple times before with these deals, like Nick Bosa, who signed like the Friday before week 1, before they played the Steelers that week. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes all the way up to that deadline, right? But I do think this gets done before week 1 at some point.
Yeah, and going back to 2021, TJ Watt did the same thing just days before the start of the season, showed up, and he had not participated in training camp at all outside of individual drills. We'll see if that ends up being the case for Micah, because right now he's walking around in Crocs and sweatpants. Like, he's got to get back on the field at some point. We know who he is. We know that that's not an issue, but you want him to be in football shape. You don't want him to have adverse injury risk because he's sat out for so long. Obviously he's working out by himself, but the sooner it can get done, the better. And we already talked about on our last show, Marcus, how Aiden Hutchinson, Trey Hendrickson, these guys could be next in line. That could impact Parsons' contract as well, particularly Hutchinson, who is younger than Parsons and was looking phenomenal before his injury. We'll see when that ultimately gets done. But I want to shift from Micah onto the other trade request, and that was Washington Commanders wide receiver Terry McLaurin, two-time Pro Bowler, has been extremely efficient. And then once he got his quarterback in Jayden Daniels last year, 9.4 yards a target, 133 passer rating when target. That included a 1,000-yard season, I think 12-ish touchdowns. He was really good last year, really good receiver. I think a lot of people would argue that he was a top 10 receiver in the NFL. And knowing how the contracts work, knowing that DK Metcalf just earned $33 million a season this offseason on a 4-year extension, he's going to want to top that. He wants to be paid. Is Washington willing to give into these contract demands? Like, why not just appease your best skill player? You obviously had a great thing going last year. His chemistry with Daniels was impeccable in Daniels' first season. Why jeopardize any of that for a 12-win team that won playoff game last year that could have a chance to compete?
I think this one's really fascinating because I actually understand both sides of it. I'm all for the players getting as much money as possible, trying to maximize their window. So, like, if McLaurin thinks he's worth X amount of money, he probably is, right? But for Washington, they're probably looking at a couple deals that just happened. So Courtland Sutton just signed a new contract with the Broncos. He's 30 and he signed for about 23, 24 million per year. Okay. You look at McLaurin and Sutton's numbers over the last 4 or 5 years, they're very similar. Now, I think you and I would both agree that McLaurin is a better receiver, but I think they're in that same kind of age bracket tier as receivers, right? Well, the kind of the rumor going around is that McLaurin wants DK Metcalf money or more than DK Metcalf money, like in that Garrett Wilson 32 to 33 million a year. And it's really hard because there's no receivers of his age making that much money. The only receiver that's making over 30 million a year, that's going to be 30 this year, is Tyreek Hill. And that deal's already looking a little rough for Miami. So does Washington want to give Terry McLaurin, who's going to be 30 in September, that much money when we have this history of these receivers really falling off once they get to the age 30, 31 season? I mean, look at guys like Devontae Adams and Cooper Kupp and Calvin Ridley. I mean, we can go on and on. Like, once these guys get to their early 30s, there's a big drop in play. I wouldn't be surprised if this one drags out for a while because it seems like they might be $10 million off per year. And that's a pretty big gap they're going to have to try to bridge.
Yeah, it's a massive gap. And you you talked about Courtland Sutton. There's no question that McLaurin is a better player. He's well-rounded. He's a do-it-all receiver. And that's why I get a little bit frustrated, Marcus, sometimes by just basing this off of volume stats. Yes, McLaurin barely topped 1,000 yards last year, but he was so efficient per target, and he was the skill player in that offense. I mean, without him, that offense doesn't function right. Obviously, you have Jayden Daniels there, but you should be able to notice like the talent tier difference. And I understand where McLaurin is coming from, but like you said, we understand where Washington's coming from too. You don't want to get yourself locked into a situation where you're paying a wide receiver what he's going to do at age 31, 32, 33, knowing that there could be a decline there, a projected decline. So they are in a predicament here, but what's the answer? How does this get resolved? Because if McLaurin's not willing to budge, are they going to have to move on from him? I know that Mike DeFabo of The Athletic just wrote about 5 teams in trade proposals that they could offer the Commanders. What would it take for the Commanders to get on board with this and to be willing to send him packing?
I mean, I don't think Washington has any desire to trade Terry McLaurin. The only way that it would work, right, is if you trade him for another receiver, because Washington believes they are in a championship window. They have the oldest roster in the league right now. they can't really afford not to have him. They're trying to maximize this window with Jaden Daniels before he gets paid a ridiculous amount of money. So they're kind of stuck. And eventually I do think Washington's going to fold and give McLaurin 31, 32 million a year. But the only way that you move him is if you trade him for another receiver who maybe doesn't like his contract situation and you flip him. But there's very few guys like that on the open market right now, which means this probably gets done here in the next couple of weeks.
And Marcus, why don't we see the franchise tag used more? Is it just a PR thing? Like, this would be terrible for your team to set the precedent like this?
That's part of it, right? You never want to tick off your star player, and that can happen a lot of times, right? The other part of it is that when you use the franchise tag on a receiver, and I don't have the number in front of me, but let's say it's like 28 million a year. That's your number for the year. And the teams can't move it around. They can't add void years. That's a big chunk of money that's dedicated on this year's salary cap. And most teams would rather sign a guy to an extension, push some of the money back into the future when the cap continues to go up. That's just a lot of money dedicated to one player in 1 year. And it's why it's very seldomly used across the NFL.
And yeah, Marcus, it makes too much sense for Washington to keep McLaurin. They were competitive last year. Like you said, they've got an old roster. Why not just run with it for now? Eventually, yes, you need to build around Jaden Daniels. You've got to build around the offense, even though Dan Quinn is your coach. You want to have a good defense. He needs to get a young, stable wide receiver who can be there with him for the long haul. But I think McLaurin would be good for the next 2 or 3 years, at least alongside Daniels. But humor me and go ahead.
Let me ask you this question. If McLaurin is dead set on making the same amount as DK Metcalf, let's say it's 33 million a year, and he's not taking any less than that, like he's not playing unless he gets that, would you give it to him?
Yeah, I think where he's at in his career right now, he's just better in almost every way than what DK Metcalf is. And so assuming both of these guys end up playing, let's say 3 seasons on their next team, you can get out of that 4th year. I would still take McLaurin over the next 3 seasons over Metcalf at the same price, even though Metcalf is roughly 3 years younger. Like it's just, I think McLaurin offers more, and you hope that decline doesn't come until his mid-30s.
Yeah. It's hard because you look at the history of these receivers. Think about all of your favorite receivers and then go look at when they started to decline. It's usually in that age 30, age 31 season. And Washington has a bunch of really smart people in their analytics department. And I'm sure they're telling the front office, like, hey, if we're paying McLaurin 34 million over the next couple of years, we might not get our money's worth. He might be, Cooper Kupp in the sense of like, hey, this guy just isn't all that valuable. But again, when you are in a championship window, kind of doesn't matter. You kind of have to go for it and make sure that he's under contract and he's happy for at least the next 2 years.
And that's ultimately what's going to happen, Marcus. Hypothetically, if the Commanders were to get rid of him, you think that a wide receiver is what they'd have to get in return, an established player. Is there any team that comes to mind? I know we didn't really prep for this at all, but what would they have to get back in order for it to be sweet enough for them to say yes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a receiver out there that Washington would flip 1 for 1. So you're probably looking at a draft pick. And if McLaurin were available for a 1st-round pick, I do think there are a lot of teams out there that would be very, very interested in that. I think the number 1 team for me would be like the Titans. If the Titans wanted to try to get Cam Ward, a receiver that can make plays down the field, I think the Chargers would be another fascinating option. They need an outside receiver with some speed. So if McLaurin ever became available, you can bet that a lot of teams would be interested, but don't expect Washington to ever make him available.
Yeah. A team that's winning playoff games here, they're not going to part with their best offensive weapon. And so, Marcus, let's move on now. And I want to talk about James Cook, Trey Hendrickson. We can hit Cook first and talk about the situation that's going on at Bills camp right now, but we've got some contract hold-ins here, if you will. And James Cook has been at camp, but he's walked out of practice the last couple of days. He is clearly frustrated. Just wrapped up his 3rd NFL season. He had 16 rushing touchdowns, 18 total touchdowns last year, eclipsed 1,000 yards for the 2nd straight season. He's a young guy. He doesn't want to be beaten, battered, and bruised without getting compensated, because we know how those running backs get abused in today's league. He wants to have that insurance. of the contract here. How far off are the Bills and James Cook in negotiations right now?
It doesn't sound like they're that far off. It sounds like it's maybe just more the years here more than the money per year. But Buffalo's in a really interesting situation because on one hand, James Cook is a very good NFL running back, and he fits Joe Brady's offense really well. And if you look at his combined touches from college and the NFL, it's only like 100 more than what Ashton Genty had over the last 2 years at Boise State. Like, he actually has a lot of wear and tear still left on the tire. So he's not your usual running back that has 1,200 touches after 3 years in the NFL. Like, he's not like that. But on the other hand, Buffalo right now, as we sit here, they're $5 million over the cap in 2026, right? So the Bills have to be very careful about how they're spending money in this next phase of the Josh Allen career, because Josh Allen got a major contract extension this offseason. They gave deals to like Christian Benford, Khalil Shakir, Terrell Bernard. They've already kind of locked up their core, and now they've got to really be careful about spending on the edges. So do you give James Cook, $12 million a year, even, that's not a ton of money, but it is quite a bit of money for a team that's over the cap? Or do you let him play out this year, let him hit free agency, give more work to Ray Davis? I'm not envious of Buffalo in this situation because I can see both sides of this.
Yeah, 100%. And we talk about how fungible of a position running back is to begin with. Is Josh Allen so good that it doesn't matter maybe as much who's back there? I mean, we've seen different degrees of success in Buffalo's backfield, but I'd agree is a perfect fit in Joe Brady's offense. It's just hard to know what to do in this situation, considering Buffalo's salary cap position, knowing that Josh Allen is approaching his age 30s and they need to win. I mean, they are a team that can compete for the Super Bowl perennially because Josh Allen is that good. Do you part with a player like James Cook after this season and potentially take a hit to that offense? And another option, Marcus, we mentioned the franchise tag. Is that something that Cook would be willing to play under, or do you think he would hold out?
Probably is going to hold out. I'm sure he wants, because he wasn't a first round pick. He doesn't have the 5th-year option. I'm sure he wants to lock up some kind of long-term deal. And usually I'm against paying running backs, but I think in this case, because of what Cook can do as a receiver and because he has so few career touches, even dating back to high school, I think this makes sense to give him a contract, not in the Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley level, but below that, more in the Josh Jacobs level of deals, because Buffalo is the favorites to win the Super Bowl this year. You're going to be the favorites probably the next 2 or 3 years, or at least among the favorites. You might as well do everything in your power to try to win right now with Josh Allen in his prime. They already have a lot of concerns with injuries on this offense and concerns about the defense. I would want to be keeping as many skilled players around Josh Allen as possible right now.
Marcus, I'm going to push back a little bit and say, why would James Cook be willing to go for such a deal in that range instead of a top of the market deal, considering how young he is, considering how much tread is left that we've already talked about? He led the NFL in, or was close to in rushing touchdowns last year. Why would he be willing to settle for less than a top of the market deal?
Well, because I think there's just a general belief that he's not somebody that you want to give 275 to 300 carries a season, right? He's a sub 200-pound back, and he's really more of a, I don't want to say part-time player because that's not right. He's just a different style of running back compared to Josh Jacobs and Barkley and Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry, where you got to be a little bit more careful how you use him. And I think maybe if he hit the open market, you wouldn't see as many teams being willing to give him that big of a deal. But I do think he should be getting, 12 to 13 million a year. And that's where I think ultimately this deal will land.
All right, let's shift from James Cook over to Trey Hendrickson, who we've talked about many times on here, Marcus. He seems to be the center of conversation because the Bengals and Hendrickson still do not have things worked out. He's also a camp hold-in. Are there any signs pointing to this getting resolved here soon, and what could that look like?
The fact that Trey Hendrickson did show up after missing the first week, I think does indicate that he's operating in good faith here. So he wants to get a deal done. He's been clear about what he wants, and it seems like from all the reports that it's not a major gap in terms of pay. It's more about the structure of the guarantees. I actually think this is way more likely to get done than the James Cook contract because the Bengals just have a lot more cap space. They've got $52 million of cap space going into next year. They already have Burrow locked up. They have their receivers. They have Orlando Brown. Like, they just don't have that many other big contracts that are coming down the pipe. So I do think this gets done. Now, does it get done this week? Probably not. I think this thing is going to take a little bit of time, but I am fairly optimistic that Trey Hendrickson does get a deal here sometime before week 1.
Marcus, let's talk money again. I think that we mentioned this maybe on a previous show, but how is it looking now with TJ Watt's contract, $41 million per season, 3-year, $123 million contract, Myles Garrett at 40. Obviously, he does not have the resume of those guys. He's not going to get what those guys got, but we saw players leapfrog each other this year. We saw Danielle Hunter get paid a bunch of money, north of $35 million per season. Nick Bosa's deal the previous offseason came in, and it was record-setting at the time, and so above $34 million a season. Where does this money, and Max Crosby as well, $35 million range, where does this money come in ultimately in terms of average annual earnings for Trey Hendrickson?
My guess is that it comes in right about $36 million a year, which would be slightly more than Danielle Hunter. But I think that's the comp because Danielle Hunter, he's on his second team as well. Actually, yeah, second team is now with Houston. He's 31. Trey Hendrickson is 31. Hendrickson is a really good pass rusher, but he's not in that level of Micah Parsons, TJ Watt, Myles Garrett. So I think he slots in just below those guys. And it's really a shame that the Bengals waited so long because initially Trey Hendrickson he wanted $30 million a year. And then he had several guys jump him like Danielle Hunter, like TJ Watt. And it's made the situation more expensive for the Bengals. But I think ultimately $36 million. The only thing I bet you they're negotiating here is how many years. With Hendrickson being an older player, I have some doubts that the Bengals want to make this a 4 or 5 year deal. They probably would like to add another year or two here, but that's ultimately where I think it ends up.
Yeah, and you can get where Hendrickson was coming from this whole time. 17 and a half sacks in back-to-back seasons, the NFL sack leader this year, high pass rush win rate. Like, he wants to get paid. And I agree with you, Marcus. I think that it will come in that 36 million range. That was the number that I had in my head. And look, being the third highest paid edge behind two players that are putting together Hall of Fame resumes, certainly nothing to scoff at. Obviously, that will change when Parsons gets his deal, as well as Aiden Hutchinson. But I think that would be enough to appease him for now. The Bengals should work getting that done, get him back on the field, because we know that Bengals defense is looking rough this year. It was rough last year, and they're going to need their best player out there. All right, Marcus, let's talk about Matthew Stafford now and this back injury that has popped up here. I mean, what are we hearing? Now, he's not jogging, but he can walk. Like, that's an encouraging sign. Like, this is something to be worried about. I think when you talk about a quarterback with a back injury, an aging player, was second oldest quarterback in the league right now, next to Aaron Rodgers, or third, I guess. Joe Flacco's still out there. They need him, obviously, as badly as anything else, to be healthy. Is he going to be healthy by week 1? And do you expect him to essentially do nothing from between now and then?
Yeah, I mean, the Rams don't play their starters ever in the preseason, so that's not going to change. And they don't like to overwork these guys in practice either. So I don't think anything would change there. The only thing I would say is that if you look at like the sports books right now, DraftKings has the Rams at 22-1 to win the Super Bowl. That's been the same as it's been over the last month and a half. So clearly the sports books don't believe this is a serious back injury. Is Stafford going to be 100% for week 1? Probably not. But is he going to be able to go out there and grit it out and still play it at a high level? I think so. I think he's been dealing with back injuries through his entire career. I think what you get nervous about is if he gets hit the wrong way, maybe, that changes things. But it seems like this is more maintenance for Matt Stafford. It's never great that a quarterback is dealing with a back injury during the offseason, but it doesn't seem like the Rams are too concerned yet.
Yeah, Marcus, and even in his old age, I mean, he still looked good last year.
Yeah.
And so how many teams are there out there who rely more on their quarterback than what the Rams do with Stafford? Like, they need him to be on the field. How's the depth looking in, and how concerning would it be if he couldn't go early in the season?
I mean, it wouldn't be great. Now, they did sign Jimmy Garoppolo this offseason to be their backup quarterback, and we can say whatever we want about Garoppolo, but he's actually one of the better backup quarterbacks. But again, the Rams just don't seem all that worried about him. Sean McVay doesn't seem like there's any concerns as he's going to be ready for week one. I think they're just trying to make sure that he can make it through the season. Honestly, this reminds me a lot of Tony Romo during the prime of his career, like before the injuries got way out of hand, but even, in the middle of his career, having to deal with this kind of stuff, limiting how much he's throwing in the offseason. The Rams know that they probably have a 1 or 2 year window here. So they're trying to maximize it, and they're trying to give Stafford as much time possible to make sure that he can make it through the season.
Marcus, it wasn't that long ago. As a Steelers fan, I remember when Pittsburgh handed Ben Roethlisberger a 2-year contract. I think it was $38.5 million at the time, which looked like chump change right now. But back when they did that deal, I wondered if they were going to get the most of it, and they did not. It was Ben at the tail end of his career. He was not the same player that he once was. Is there a chance that we're looking at this 2-year, $80 million contract from Stafford that the Rams give Stafford, and looking at this team regretting this deal?
It's possible, but it's also only 2 years. I mean, like it could be worse. And I think the Rams are already starting to put some things into place so that they can maybe draft their next quarterback. Remember, they made this big trade with the Falcons on draft day where they have the Falcons' future first round pick in 2026, including their own. We know that next year's draft class is supposed to be so much better with quarterbacks. There was a rumor about Arch Manning and the Rams kind of plotting to get him, but it does feel like the Rams know that this could go at any moment. So they're trying to have these assets in place. So when Stafford does decide to hang him up, or when it's clear that he's not able to be the same caliber of quarterback, they have options in place. So this does feel a little touch and go right now, but overall, I'm not super concerned yet because we still have over a month until week one. I think Stafford will be ready to go.
Yeah, and I can 100% see the Rams, depending on how things go this year, as one of those teams that is in the hunt for a quarterback early in the 2026 offseason, starts grooming that guy, even if Stafford's here for the 2026 season. His contract is void in 2027, and I just don't know how he's going to hold up after that. It's already had a really long, impressive NFL career, but we'll see if he can give us another good season in 2025. All right, Marcus, I want to talk about which players you are excited to see in week one of the preseason. You and I are the degenerates that would watch the Hall of Fame game from start to finish, and nothing super exciting about that. You're watching backups play. It's going to be much of the case in week one again. I expect week two, with the 3-week preseason schedule, not counting the Hall of Fame game, is when we will see the starters play the most, although most teams either won't play their starters or they'll play for a couple of series. But in week one here, Marcus, who are you hoping to see out there on the field this week?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of rookies, and we can get to all those guys in a second. But I'm actually watching the Bengals because the Bengals are going to play their starters in preseason for the first time. I don't believe Joe Burrow has ever taken a snap in the preseason. And one of the things that Zach Taylor has said is that they've got to start playing in the preseason because they're usually so bad early in the season. Go look at like the Bengals record with Joe Burrow under center in September. It's awful. They've got to get off to a faster start. So I want to see what this Bengals offense looks like. I want to see how Joe Burrow looks. I want to see what the offensive line looks like. We'll get to some rookies in a second, but I think the Bengals are a team that I'm going to really keep my eye on during weeks 1 and 2 of the preseason.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes you wonder if there's something to that. Like, I know Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, they like to be really aggressive in the preseason, not to overplay their starters, but they typically start off the year pretty well. And the Bengals it's been the opposite case where they were almost completely out of the running. They had to fight back late, and that's been the case with that team. So I'm interested to see how that goes. Marcus, I would throw a rookie out there, and one of the biggest overall rookies to watch in the preseason in general this year, I think, is Tyler Shuck. You have to look at the quarterback of the New Orleans Saints. He is that guy. The depth is not good. You've got Spencer Rattler there, Jake Haener, like, they're not the answers. It's Shuck or bust, and you could be looking at a team that maybe is getting the number 1 pick in the draft next year, depending on how Shuck goes. They're going to live and die by the guy who turns 26 years old early this season. how do you expect him to look? Because on paper, like we're talking about a guy that was Justin Herbert's backup at Oregon.
Mhm.
That's how long he was in cycling through college football. Do you expect him to look good right away, or is he still raw,
Well,
still going to take your lumps?
it hasn't been great in Saints camp so far. Jake Haener has actually been running with the first team a lot in those practices. So I think Shuck is somebody that needs a big preseason to kind of
Mhm.
get the ball rolling, downhill a little bit. He's one that I'm watching. Another one is Shedeur Sanders. And I think everybody's going to be keeping an eye on Shedeur
Sure.
Sanders because he's clearly the fourth quarterback in Cleveland right now. Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, and then Dylan Gabriel have all been working with the ones. Not the case for Shedeur Sanders. And we know what happens with these day 3 picks. Like if you can't make it during your rookie year and you get cut, it's really hard to catch on elsewhere. And with everybody passing on Shedeur multiple times during the draft, he needs to have a big preseason to kind of show that he is somebody that's worth developing long term. So I think Tyler Shuck is interesting. Shedeur Sanders is interesting. So is Dylan Gabriel. Really, all the rookie quarterbacks, Jalen Milroe, I want to see a little bit in Seattle. It's just our first chance seeing these guys on an NFL field in their uniforms and seeing if the moment's too big for them.
Hey, Marcus, I got to talk about Shedeur for a second here. We always say that your opportunities are tied to your draft position. And with the biggest slide that maybe we've seen ever for a quarterback, there's already so many teams that are apparently out on him. Like they had a chance to draft him 3rd, 4th round, some of the teams in the 5th round before he finally went to Cleveland in the 5th. They're not going to keep 4 quarterbacks. I wouldn't imagine. I mean, that you'd break trends. Is just teams don't do that. If he doesn't make the Browns roster, are there going to be suitors out there for Shedeur Sanders? Because a lot of teams were out on him to begin with.
There'll be suitors, but suitors as a sense of like, hey, come be on our practice squad and we'll see what it looks like. Like nobody's going to sign him to to compete for a starting job or to even be a backup. Like those days are gone. Like he's fighting to be on an NFL roster. And that's why he needs to have a big camp.
It's just so wild to hear you say that out loud. Because if we would have had this conversation in mid-April and said that by the time that August rolls around, Shedeur Sanders will be fighting for his NFL career, essentially fighting for his spot on a roster, nobody would have believed that. And so definitely keep an eye on the Cleveland Browns. I think that quarterback room will be super interesting to see how that shakes out. I think that Flacco obviously has the upper hand there. Being the veteran, they want to be able to compete, bounce back from last season. Any other names that you wanted to mention before we log off here?
Yeah, there are quite a few guys around the league that I really want to see, like Travis Hunter. He's one of the guys I just want to see. How are the Jags using him? Are they using more at receiver, more on the defensive side? I mean, that's a big name. But if you want to go a little bit deeper, like guys that could actually make a difference for some of these playoff teams, I'm looking at like the Ravens and with Mike Green, who they got in the 2nd round, the pass rusher for Marshall. The Ravens have an awesome defense, but one of the things they don't have is a premier pass rusher. If Mike Green can come in here and give them some juice off the edge, that could be the difference from them being like the 3 seed to the 1 seed. So some guys like that, just 2nd, 3rd round picks, how do they fit with their current team? I always love the preseason. It's always fun to watch these guys, but as always, don't overreact too much based on what you see this weekend.
100%. Kenny Pickett had 158.3 passer rating in the preseason in 2023, and it didn't equate to anything. Marcus, I want to see that next Victor Cruz level breakout guy. Like I feel like we haven't had that in quite some time. So I'm just excited for the preseason in general. I'll be watching all these games, not all of them live, but I'll try to catch up with them because football's back and we're excited for it. All right, we go live on the Stack in the Box No Huddle Show every single Monday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. You can follow me on X at Tommy Jaggi. Follow Marcus on X at Marcus_Mosher. Thanks again for watching.